It's never been easier to launch a business, and as a result, it's actually never been more imperative to differentiate it. Right? Everybody has access to the same tools. Right? The business model and your technology can eventually be replicated. Eventually, right? So what should you focus on? You should focus on differentiating. That's why I think identity is more important than ever in this day and age. The one thing they can't replicate is an authentically cultivated identity. Why would you want to identify as generic? Anybody here want to identify as generic? As a person? No. Why would you create a business that's generic? I know that's just me, right? What if understanding your identity can differentiate you more than anything else? Right? Spending $1 billion on marketing. When you create a unique and authentic brand, you can spend way less because you're separating yourself from the clutter. I was sitting down with people just like yourself that are starting these companies, and they were just talking about their business, and I'm like, there's more to this than your business, right? Like, who are you? And I would ask them that question. My name is John Johnson, as he mentioned, born and raised in Cleveland, actually right down the street, Gordon Square area, West 69th in Detroit. Spent 13 years there. Grew up there when it was not like it is now. It was a lot rougher. You didn't want to walk down the street. Last great event I went to, I was telling people, I said, wow, when I lived here, if you walk down the street, you get beat up. Now we're doing rooftop parties and golden hour events. There's bands from New York doing events looking over the lake, and it was spectacular. So let's give Tom and his team a round of applause for just bringing culture to Cleveland in a way that honestly I haven't seen. So I spent time in Phoenix, about 6 years, moved there after I left here, and spent some time in Seattle. And honestly, I haven't been to many events that are this special, bringing diverse communities together. That's my goal. So I was talking to, I think, Jing, and this word collision comes up, and that's what's happening here. And when we collide, we innovate, right? When we innovate, we start to change the world around us. We start to change. And something I'm passionate about is identity, and I like to call myself an identity architect. So as Tom mentioned, I run a design studio, and I'm going to talk about identity, but I'm going to make it relevant to what I do so that y'all can, I can speak as an expert rather than just, a theorist or a professor or, whatever else you want to think. So please, check us out on Instagram. And this talk is actually around this idea of a logo. So when Tom said pick a word, of course identity came up. But I want you to think about this talk as you are more than a logo. One of my biggest pet peeves is when people reach out to me and say, hey, can you make me a logo? I'm like, no, I can't. Please get out of my face. No. It's my second least favorite statement then what do you do? All right, so please never ask me that question. It's my least favorite question in the world because it's very uncreative, I feel like, right? And what are you learning from somebody when you ask them what they do? Because there's so much more than what they do. So as I mentioned, I'm John Johnson, principal of a small studio. A little background on me, graduated from Kent State, got my master's in architecture and my MBA at Kent State. All right, you can get loud for Kent State, let's go. And I loved bringing people together through collision. So a lot of my projects were, how do you get people to collide? How do you get people to interact with one another? And there's me, young John. It was nice. And then I moved to Phoenix. So spent 6 years in Phoenix and actually studied practiced architecture, worked for Architecton, worked on some really cool projects. Bjarke Ingels, anybody here of Bjarke Ingels? He's an incredible architect, star architect, one of the youngest star architects to ever come out. He's built some incredible things. This was not one of the things he built. However, he wanted to build it in Phoenix, and I got to be a part of it, and I got included on an email with him, and that's about as far as our relationship goes. However, it was huge. All right. If you ever watched the Netflix series called Abstract, It's spectacular about creativity. And if you watch the one on architecture, it's about him, and you could see the pin in the background. And I lost it. I'm not much of a fan person, but that guy's special. After that, I got into entrepreneurship. Did my first startup. Left architecture. Really didn't want to be an architect in the traditional sense. And built an app that actually is about what you're doing today, colliding with one another. When you walk into a space, you see everybody else that's there. And the idea was to connect with them rather than go on your computer or go on your phone and do work and connect with other people that aren't in the space with you. All of you are here for a reason, right? Every person you're sitting next to, they're right there for a reason. Talk to them, right? Collide with them, and that's what that app was created to do. Feel free, and it's like this idea of feel free to talk to me. Unfortunately, it did not succeed, but I learned a lot and got me to where I am today. After that, I actually got really passionate about entrepreneurship and community building. So spent a lot of time in Phoenix, worked with an organization called Seed Spot, launched the first African American entrepreneurship boot camp in Arizona. Did a lot of events, like the one you see here is Battle of the Bands. So when I heard about Tom, and that's why I reached out to him, like, bro, like, this is what I was doing, and now I have babies, and I stopped doing it until they get a little older, right? But it's a little too much time on my plate. Did actually organize the largest pitch competition in Arizona. There were 1,500 people there at the Orpheum Theater. And just did a little bit of what you're seeing me do today, just a little bit of community organizing, so on and so forth. And then after that, went to Seattle, and that's when I started a small studio, right? We worked with organizations all over the world, large enterprise companies, small startups. We work with Niantic Labs right now as a client of ours. They're the creator of Pokemon Go. We're working with some of the largest gold and silver trading companies is another client of ours in Phoenix. I have a team spread out all over the world. London, Vancouver, I think Atlanta, right? We built a remote studio, but the whole premise was we built this agency to help people understand who they are and how to translate that into the marketplace powerfully, right? So we like to say at a small studio, everything starts with identity, right? And obviously that's the word for today. And when I started this agency, we do branding, right? Everybody knows what branding is, maybe. You might hear a little bit more about it. But for me, it was so much more than just branding. I was working with these people. I was sitting down with people just like yourself that are starting these companies. And they were just talking about their business. And I'm like, there's more to this than your business, right? Like, who are you? And I would ask them that question. And I would start to get to the bottom of their story, right? Those moments in their story that were so special and unique, right? Like Tom was saying earlier, you are not like any other person in the room, right? Who would agree you're not like any other person? You are one of a kind, all right? And I want to state that you are one of a kind, and Coco lets you be one of a kind in all of these little areas. I can't wait to take pictures. But as I was doing that work around branding, this word identity architect came up. And that's how I started to call myself an identity architect, because I would help these founders, like, hey, there's so much more to your story. The way you can separate yourself is by going down deep, reflecting on who you are, and let's bring that out into the world. So that premise came up actually when I traveled to Madagascar. I created the first identity architecture workshop for a lot of nonprofit community leaders in Madagascar. It was spectacular. Anybody been to Madagascar before? Who knew that Madagascar was a real place? Anybody? Okay. It's funny how many people don't believe that it's a real place. Madagascar is one of the six poorest country, I think poorest country in the world. Right, a lot of poverty in Madagascar. A lot of community leaders I got to work with, and I came up with this workshop because I'm like, I don't want to talk to you about business. I feel like business is a very privileged way of thinking. All right, I think entrepreneurship is a very privileged word that is put out there a lot, because not many people have access to that way of thinking. So I transitioned the workshop to focus on who they are as a person, right? Because you're doing this work for a reason. So I came up with this workshop. I ended up launching it, doing it all over the world, doing it remotely during COVID, and that's how I started to become an identity architect, right? So identity architecture, in my opinion, is the art and practice of uncovering your unique perspective that motivates and cultivates engagement. Right, that's engagement for you as an individual, whether it's your job, your business, right, your events, or engagement for the people that are engaging with you, right, your community, your audience, right? Tom has built an incredible community around Greyt, right? And this word great, even though, spell check messes with it all the time, right? I feel your pain, man. Now that I started doing this, I'm like, great, no. Um, that's how I define identity, art and practice, because it takes practice to reflect. It takes practice to understand who you are. Otherwise, if you're not practicing, what happens? You just become like everyone else, right? So I like to start this talk with, this idea of what identity architecture is, and start to separate identity architecture from branding, right? And start to show you why I believe it's so important. So this number on the screen is a big number, right? $1.6 billion. Who knows what this number represents? Anybody want to guess? Guess. Just guess. National debt? Ooh, I wish. We wish. We'd be rolling in the dough. No. Oh, there you go. Maybe. Now, that number is how much these brands have spent on their brand, right? They spent cumulatively that much redesigning their logos, all right? Focusing on their branding, focusing on their representation of their organization, right? So some of these are some big companies, right? You can translate that and replace those logos with other brands. I'm sure it's the same thing because it's nothing more than a quest for identity, right? They're figuring out, how can I relate to people? How can I get people to understand who we are and buy our products and engage with our products, right? To mean something more and timeless to themselves and their customers, right? That's a lot of money that they're spending on their brand and on their identity as an organization. So let's break down what a logo is. A logo is a graphic mark, emblem, symbol, or stylized name used to identify a company, organization, product, or brand. All right. Would anybody agree with that? Anybody want to add? Anybody in here do branding? Yeah. Yeah. It's like, that's all right. Yeah, that's a general definition. Used to identify a company, organization, product, or brand. Okay. So identify. So when you say, make me a logo, you're saying, help me identify myself in the marketplace, right? And especially in the time that we live in, right? Identification is very important, right? Everybody agree? You got to identify yourself in a more complex way than ever before. And I think that's really great because people can start to separate themselves and say, I'm much more than just this label, right? I'm so much more than that. And that's why I said you're more than a logo. So when people send me, say, I need a logo, remember I said that's my least favorite thing. Typically, as an entrepreneur or in a startup space, I know we have Bright here, right? Typically, as you're going through this process of launching something, you have an idea, you test it, you validate it, right? And you get to this point, name it, right? Anybody ever name a company here? Yeah, okay, all right. How, is it easy? Raise your hand if it was easy. Yeah, why was it easy?
I did a play on my name.
Okay, there you go.
My name's Tina, and so I did tenacity.
Tina Asti?
No.
I was like, all right.
Tenacity.
Tenacity. Okay, perfect. That's beautiful. I love that you said you did play on your name, and that's your company, right? And what does your company do? Marketing. Okay, perfect. Tenacity. The tenacity of you. I had the Tina. What did I say? Tina Nasty. I was like, all right, Tina. Yeah. There you go. So at this point where you name it, right, you're starting to identify with the organization. That's when I think it starts to get personal for me, right? And then you create the business. You file the LLC for Tina Nasty. No. You imagine going to the place. They're like, no. You build a team, right? You sell a product, so on and so forth, right? Anybody? That's typically the route that you take, right? But when it comes to this logo, especially in this day and age, I feel like everybody's, especially with AI and so on and so forth, everybody's getting a little more generic, Anybody say like things are getting more and more generic as the days? Content that you're getting, the emails, the things on social media, yada yada yada. It's accelerating. It's only going to continue to accelerate. So typically, when you need a logo, especially if you don't want to spend a lot of resources, right? You go to your nearest designer. I like to say that because it's like you go to your nearest convenience store. You go on Fiverr or 99 Designs. Anybody use those? I'm not. It's not a bad thing. Arthur, stop to put your hand down. They ask you a few questions. Anybody ever work with a designer to do design work? Okay, so they ask you a couple questions, right? They're like, all right, well, who are you? Maybe, what's your business like? Who's your customer? So on and so forth. And then they design a few concepts. They get them back to you. You either hate them, right? And you start over and they iterate a little bit. Or why are you laughing? Because you're like, no, this isn't it. This isn't it. Or you love it and you're like, boom, I got a brand, right? And there's nothing wrong with that process. That's typical. That happens a lot. This is actually a text message I got yesterday. And I crossed out the guy's name, but I get this all the time because, I do this for a living. So I don't know if you could read that, but I had lunch with him the day before, and he showed me like what he was about to launch his fund with, and I gave him a quick critique, and I'm like, get rid of this logo mark, please. Just get rid of it. You don't need it. Just use a word mark, right? Make it simple. And then he sent me these 4 iterations. I'm like, I know for a fact you went to a designer, like a graphic designer, and they, put this either into an artificial intelligence platform or they just went to the nearest generic design you can get. I'm like, he asked, is it better? I'm like, what do you mean is it? I don't know. I haven't done any research. I don't know who you are yet. And I told him, I said, that's like me sending you a valuation and you haven't seen my financials, right? Like that's what happens when somebody says, I need a logo. It's like, okay, well, you got a lot of work to do to translate your identity into the marketplace through business, right? Y'all tracking with me here? I'm just taking you on a journey. So all of these, anybody like any of these? Look good? What number would you choose? 2? All right. 2 is the most simple. I told him, like, just keep it simple. If you're not going to do the work, just go ahead and just keep it simple. Don't try too hard because it will change eventually, all right? And he's like, so none of them? I'm like, no, none of them. Stop it. Get out of my face. Who knows the average cost of a logo? 10,000? Okay. Huh? Any other guess? 1,000? All right. $250? All right. Now we're getting a range. $5? All right. So not Nikki. You're close. No, that based on 99 designs, they say the average cost is 300 to about 1,300. They probably push out the most logos out there. They've created a platform, and good for them, right? They created a platform that allows this stuff to happen, but it's not good for everybody else that has to interact with these brands because it's terrible. But I went on, just out of curiosity, I went on 99 Designs website. Nikki, you said $5, right? So on this left column, $10 to $50, right? Logo maker. Basic and generic logos built with a selection of stock icons and fonts. Very quick turnaround time. This one right here just kills me. Extremely budget and time-conscious businesses that are okay with a generic design. My heart. As an identity architect, right? Like my job is to make sure nothing about your work that you're paying me to do is generic, right? But there's platforms out there that say, okay, it's okay with a generic design. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this, but gosh, no. When you're more than a logo, like please do not create a generic design. Because everything that you put out there is a representation of who you are, right? Remember the definition of a logo, to identify you. Why would you want to identify as generic? Anybody here want to identify as generic? As a person? No. Why would you create a business that's generic? I know that's just me, right? And maybe you make a bunch of money doing generic. There's a lot of people that make a bunch of money doing generic things, especially on Amazon, right? But there's nothing wrong with that. They're making a bunch of money. So my premise here is like, especially with angel investors, and if you're anybody here doing a startup? Yeah, right? Anybody raising money, capital? Okay. Anybody raised money before? Yeah. All right. So, just to make this context of around entrepreneurship, most angel investors are not investing in the business. They're investing in what? The person, the founder, the leader of the organization, right? You rally around that person. So just that alone, it's like you're not investing in the business, you're investing in the people. Then why would you invest in something generic? The people aren't generic, right? The people are very, very unique, very, very uh, dynamic in many ways. So I always like to tell people, what if understanding your identity can differentiate you more than anything else, right? Spending $1 billion on marketing, right? When you create a unique and authentic brand, you could spend way less because you're separating yourself from the clutter. You're separating yourself from all the other nonsense out there, all the other generic things that are created. And Coco did that tremendously here, right? She separated herself by building the biggest selfie space in the world. I'm saying that from now on. All right, she separated herself by doing something unique. All right, I just want to encourage all of y'all here, like, you should do something unique because you're unique. All right, it's never been easier to launch a business, and as a result, it's actually never been more imperative to differentiate it. Right? Everybody has access to the same tools. Everybody. Everybody can launch a business. I was just talking to, what's your name? Polly. And you tell me your website on Notion, right? Notion, you can whip up a website without any 2 minutes. You can have a website. Launch it to the world. Have access to the world, right? Everybody has access to these tools. You could do it easily, right? The business model and your technology can eventually be replicated, eventually, right? So what should you focus on? You should focus on differentiating. That's why I think identity is more important than ever in this day and age. The one thing they can't replicate is an authentically cultivated identity. They can't do that, right? And that's why I started to get into this idea of focusing on who you are as a person, right? So identity is the unique composition of attributes and experiences that reveal to others who you truly are, right? So when I call myself an identity architect, that's what I do, is I focus on who you are, your unique composition of experiences and attributes that tell others who you truly are, right? So who are you, really? Has anybody ever asked you that question? Like, who are you really? When I interview people for my company, I ask them that question. I'm like, who are you? And then they read off their resume. All right, tell me where they're from, what they got the degree in, maybe, what they're good at. And then I ask them, I add that really. Y'all should try it. Add the really. Like, who are you really? Did you see their face? Well, they start talking about their parents. They start talking about their siblings. Right? They start talking about experiences that they've had in life, where they're from potentially, what the things they identify with as a culture, right? The things that they identify as, when they're from Cleveland, right? One of the things I got all the time when I traveled, they're like, well, what do you think about LeBron James? I'm like, well, I left too, so I don't know. I have no opinion, no comment. Thanks for that. So I asked that question, who are you really? So when I told you, I created a workshop to help people walk through this. So I want to give you all a little bit. If you are going through this process and want to start to reflect on who you are, right, start with your name. Tina, you did exactly that. Right? Anybody here know the definition of their name? Yeah, raise your hand if you know the definition of your name. Okay, that's about half the room, actually less than half. All right, who raise your hand if you don't know the definition of your name based on Google. All right, Google it today after this talk. Just Google it. You'll find it really quickly. I always start with people's names because there's a lot of meaning, right? Why do I start with people's names? Anybody know? Guess, Tina. I'm gonna pick on you. You're right here.
It's the first thing people learn about you.
It's the first word of your story, right? If somebody comes up to you and shakes your hand, what do you say? I'm Tina. I'm Nasty. Tina Nasty. That's perfect. You should do that. They'll be like, what? That's your first word of your story, right? It's important. You're starting your story when you introduce yourself to the world with a word, and that's your name. And if you don't know the definition of that name, you are identifying with a word that you don't even know what it means, right? So it's not, y'all should look it up because I think it's very important, right? It's the first word of your story, right? Then I like to dive into your story, right? Your story shaped you into the person you are today, giving you a one of a kind perspective, right? When I think about the story, I always go into this idea of love and pain, right? If you ever just remember two experiences, when you felt loved and when you felt pain, right? Just those two experiences, I guarantee you, align with what you are putting out into the world. If you are starting a business or running a business, that could help your team, you can help your community understand who you are. It can help me help you, right? Translate that into the marketplace. Your story is very important because it helps people relate to you, right? And your attributes, right? A quality or feature regarded to as a characteristic or inherent part of someone, right? A lot of times when you say, who are you, right? What kind of person are you? Your personality, so on and so forth. You start to list attributes. All right, I won't list Tina's attributes. Anybody else want to? Any attributes, Nikki? How would you identify? What attribute would you use?
For myself,
Yeah.
hilarious.
All right. Hilarious. There you go. There you go. Coco, how about you? Fun. All right. You like to have fun? Sarah? Come on. What attribute? Huh? Caring. All right. My wife, y'all. Um, yeah, like those are attributes that can help people understand you, right, and how to translate who you are. And then ultimately, a need. Understanding your identity allows you to see certain needs in ways no one else can. This is very important, right? Because typically we like to identify with things that we care about, right? Would y'all agree with that? When you're trying to serve a need that you uniquely are equipped to solve, right? What does that create typically? What do you think? When you're like, man, I care about this need. What do you think? It's a value proposition to customers, yeah, but for you, like what does that create when you align who you are with a need? Comfort, purpose. Did you say purpose? Passion. There you go. Desire. Yeah, yeah. That's it. Huh? Value, right? Would you say all those things are valuable? Especially for an entrepreneur trying to launch a business or an employee or whatever it is, right? You have to align your identity with that. So I gave you those are some things that we do to help not only break down who you are, but also how to translate that in the marketplace. So there was one of our clients, this is one of those $5 logos that they went um, online and got, right? It's not, it's not bad. They're a B2B marketplace, B2C marketplace for hairstylists, right? And just people in the beauty industry. So they sent me this and we started working with them and like, all right, well, who are you from this, right? What does this say to you? So we didn't change their name, right? But we updated just their whole entire style, right? One of the things is that as a beautician, you work with your hands typically, right? And your fingerprint is that thing that you're touching people. Your humans are your canvas, right? So they love this idea of a fingerprint. We went through a whole workshop, everything, but we created much more than a logo, right? We created a whole design system, color palette, right? Iconography, fonts, so on and so forth, and figured out how to translate that into their entire mobile application. So you can start to see how that can translate way more than a logo into digital application, right? From the colors, the cities, so on and so forth, right? Uh, I don't know. Cleveland, I think Cleveland is on there. Well, not on this screen. Oh, shut up, Paulie. Dang. Remember, I'm new here. I'm coming back. This is my first talk in Cleveland. Give me a break, all right? I'll update it eventually. But even they're actually based in Buffalo now. They moved there. They won I think, a couple $1 million to move to Buffalo. And now these founders, Ty and Courtney Caldwell, right? That's who we worked with to help to translate who they are in the marketplace. Now they have billboards that they are proud to stand in front of, right, and represent them. And this is, I think, a beautiful picture. It's like you are more than a logo. Like this is your identity translated into the marketplace, right? We've done that for a number of brands like Dose. Paulie, you were saying you were just looking through this, right? Creating a palette of experiences, right? Utilizing fonts that can tell the message, iconography, so on and so forth. Even nonprofits that we've worked with, right? Because your identity can span across the world, right? And how do you do that? And we also worked with Futureland. They were our first client here locally. Yep. So they gave us a logo, right? But they didn't have an identity. All right. So they had this logo created, but I'm like, well, who are you? What is this event trying to represent? And their theme this year. Who attended Futureland? Anybody? All right. So their theme this year was Thrive. So we had to create everything else but the logo. So how do you create an identity from just having that logo? You start to enhance it, right? With illustrations, enhance it with color palettes, fonts, right? The way you display the speakers, right? So on and so forth. And ultimately translate it to Playout Square for the first time. This was a really proud moment for me because I'm from Cleveland, finally moved back and got my first client here in Cleveland and was able to be on these new marquees. Anybody been in Playout Square with the new marquees? Right, this beautiful experience, but it's like, imagine if that was just a logo, right? But they figure out how to translate this into way more than just that logo, right? So I want to just repeat, identity is a unique composition of attributes and experiences that reveal to others who you truly are, right? So I want you to, as you think about that word and reflect on that word identity, whether you're launching a business or you're even exploring a job, right? Just remember that logo that you put on your resume or on your LinkedIn or whatever it is, it's a representation of you in a way. And I wish more and more of us in the marketing industry and the branding industry would think about it this way, because we're representing human beings with every piece of work that we do. And I think it actually allows me to engage with my work more and take it more, I want to say, seriously, because we're impacting the world with everything that we do, everything we touch. So I like to just say and encourage all of y'all, I think it's very important that you reflect before you project. All right, so you think about this word identity, reflect in order to project. And what we were talking about, when you align your identity with a need, right? I think that it actually leads to your purpose, right? Who am I? What am I trying to do in the world? And it allows you to live on purpose. All right, so remember, everything starts with identity. That's my talk today. Thank you.